Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on Porsche GT center intakes. We're going to be looking across a couple different generations, starting with the 997, moving into the 991, and then finishing up on the 718 GT4. The point of that is just to look how Porsche evolved the design of the intake center sections and their valve assemblies, and to understand how OODA Motorsports took those learnings and is applying them back to the older 997 generation. So let's start by taking a look at a 997 RS center intake, which you can see here. This is a cast aluminum piece. This was kind of a big deal for Porsche when they launched it. They were bragging about it in the materials of the 3.8 RS, talking about the additional low-down torque that the new intake delivered. Just to kind of quickly go through how these intakes work. Let's go ahead and open up these. So, air comes in here to the intake, then it goes left or right. There's an additional piece that isn't on here, but essentially the air would kind of make a 180-degree turn and then go through one of these openings. And then the engine RPM goes ahead, or excuse me, the engine computer controls if these flaps are open based on RPM and many different variables. And so this would be the closed position for the small. This would be the open position. Exactly the same here. In this example here, the OODA Motorsports kit is actually already installed. And so let's take a look at the original rod and flap and see what they look like. So here you can see that we have two rods, and this is the original rods, and this is the flaps that go with them, and these come together to build a valve inside of the intake. So you can take a look here at this rod design. Material here is pretty basic. It's a plain carbon steel 1020. And you can also see a lot of the holes throughout the rod that were used to facilitate the mounting of the flap. And so how this works is there's this slit. You can see here that this slides in and kind of there's a bottom out place because of these ridges. And then to secure it, you would take this little screw, and these screws essentially kind of fit in here, and you would screw this down, and then that would essentially complete the assembly, and then that would be inside this intake here, and be able to open and close as commanded by the ECU. And so this design was not the best, and it has had a couple of problems over the years. Starting in about 2013, 2014, there was instances of these screws essentially backing out of this assembly, and then because you're in the intake path, gets sucked into the engine. And then basically causing a ton of damage when the piston punches it. So yeah, that Porsche addressed with a service campaign. The code for that is WC512. And so they basically applied red Loctite to these screws to basically kind of fix that problem, or maybe a band-aid on that. But that's not the only problem with this assembly. And so over here we can actually see what would happen to my personal 3.8 RS. So this was a fully complete large flap. You can see that it's totally just destroyed here. When this happens, these pieces can get sucked into the engine bay. There's a piece here that's missing in this example, and you can see it broke off right there. And that went in and caused a bunch of damage to my engine. And that's kind of the story and the genesis of OODA Motorsports. So you can see here, you know, that this totally failed. And given that there was a service campaign, Porsche was obviously quite aware of, you know, these failures. So yeah, that's kind of the starting point of where the 997 started. I think that's like a good segue to look into now the 991 design and what changes Porsche made. All right, now that we are looking at the 991 center intake housing, we can see some things have changed. It's no longer aluminum, it's moved to plastic. I think that is a lightweighting maneuver, as the original one is quite heavy. Again, same basic design. You can see air comes in, goes left or right, and we have two different kind of air pathways here, and based on how the flaps are positioned, you know, you would go into different ways. So again, similar functions, different new material. So let's go ahead and move that over here. Let's take a look at the new design of the rod and flap, as Porsche made some significant changes in the 991 generation. So looking in the 991 generation, let's first start looking at the rods. So here we can see, you know, pretty massive design change for how the rods, you know, are built and how they work with the flaps. All of the holes and slits have been removed from the design, and they have also added some more diameter as well on the larger one when comparing. So if I kind of bring over the 997 one, let's take it apart here, you can kind of see that, you know, quite a bit thicker there. And again, all of these kind of slits and everything are gone. Yeah. So that change is pretty clear. Material-wise, the material is the same. And so again, looking at a plain carbon 1020 steel, Porsche at the time must have felt that, you know, this wasn't a material challenge, but more a design challenge. And, you know, by eliminating a lot of these poor design choices, that this assembly would be much stronger. So let's take a look at the flaps and how those have changed as well. So I can bring in the 997 ones. So first off, we can see there's a material change. So these new flaps are a nylon 30% glass fill. And these original 997 flaps are just, looks like stamped aluminum. With the new design, you know, the way that the rod mounts, the flap is totally different. So before, obviously, there was a hole. Now the flap slides over the rod and clicks in. You know, this change allows for the rod to just, you know, be way beefier, not to have any, you know, holes in it to, you know, kind of create areas of weakness where stress adders can start for fatigue failure. Yeah, so that is kind of a good update and how Porsche moved ahead in the 991. You know, looking at what design changes they made and material changes, and you know, this generation doesn't have any documented failures like the 997 generation does, where you know those rods are falling apart. Yeah, and so let's go ahead and move forward and take a look at the 718 GT4 intake and see if Porsche made some additional changes, and if they did, what they are. Now we're taking a look at a 718 GT4 center intake. You'll notice that actually looks very similar to the 997 era generation. Design, again, very similar. You know, air coming into here, you know, choosing between the two different pathways with a valve in each different pathway to control that flow. And so you can see here, it's back to an aluminum housing here, and yeah, that's very similar to the 997 GT3 and GT3 RS. So let's take a look at the new rod and flap assemblies that Porsche brought with this new GT4 design. And so here is the rod and flap assembly out of the GT4. So we can see here, there's a lot of similarities carried over from the 991, which I have right here. So let's see, I get these here and together. So basically using a similar mounting mechanism for the rod and flap, and keeping the designs pretty similar for the rods. But let's take a look at some of the changes that they did make. So here you can see in the original 991 RS design, the small rod is square and quite small. When you look at the new GT4 one, you can see there's a bit more diameter there, and quite a bit bigger. It's also quite obvious that the GT4 design uses a better material. With the GT4, they went to a 303 stainless steel, which we can see here looks quite a bit different. Yeah, so some improvements to the small flap, or to the small rod, and then, you know, a material upgrade for both of the rods. As far as the flap design is concerned, we can see that the designs are still fairly similar, mounting over the rod. Material here is not changed. It's a nylon 30% glass fill. Sizing wise, you can actually see that the GT4 has a bigger intake opening here. So this is the large flap size comparison. You can kind of see that it's quite a bit bigger, and actually quite comparable to the 997. So this is a 997 flap. So you can see here, wow, they're pretty much, you know, the same. Versus, you know, you can see here the 991 flap is a bit smaller. So yeah, like dimensionally very similar. Mounting mechanism is the same, you know, kind of fits on over just like that, and that's fully assembled, and that's how it would sit inside of the intake housing. Same idea here for the small flap. Again, fits on over just like that. Yeah, so again, some more improvements made. You know, I would say the biggest one here being material, and then some small changes made to the design of the small rod. as it has more material. And you can see here on the 991, it gets quite thin in this one section, which I think is a risk. Yeah, so that kind of covers the different designs here. I guess we can bring in actually the original design. So this is let's get this reordered here in the correct order. So as we can see here, starting with the 997, which is the initial design and ultimately the weakest one, we can see that basic material used, all of the different kind of holes that have been cut into this, and how thin the material really gets at some of these cross sections. Moving into 991, material remains the same, but totally new design, no holes, a bigger diameter, so more material. We can see that, and with this new design, we had to find a new way to mount the flaps. And then in the latest iteration here on a 718 GT4, we can see design carrying through, material upgrade applied, and some design changes to the small rod, as we see this original 991 has this kind of smaller section. Yeah, so that is kind of a history lesson, or a kind of a deeper dive into these different components. Next, let's bring in the OODA Motorsports part and take a look at how we've kind of looked across all of this and built something for the 997 that we feel is higher quality than what you see in a 718 GT4 here. Let's take a look at the OODA Motorsports kit and compare it across 3 different generations here, and what learnings were applied, and how we feel it is a high quality part fit for a Medsker engine. And so here I have everything kind of laid out for us, starting with the 997, moving to the 991, moving to the 718, and then ending on the OODA. When we were building this kit, there was basically 3 kind of principles that we were chasing to improve it over the original 997 design and parts. And those 3 are, we wanted to have a better design, we wanted to have better materials, and we wanted to have more material. And we feel those 3 things give us some strong overlap, and gave me enough confidence to put it in my own car and really test these parts at the track, and really put them through their paces. So let's talk about that design improvement. So the original 997 has all these holes in it, which is kind of where you can see there's not a lot of material in some of these cross sections. When I compare that to the OODA part, we're just, a solid rod here, a lot more girth, and just definitely a lot stronger. And we felt, when we also saw Porsche kind of following a similar trajectory here, that that's a strong signal when compared to the original design. Let's take a look at the materials. So starting here, we had the plain carbon steel 1020 in the original 997. That stayed the same in the 991. Moving to the 718, Porsche upgraded to 303 stainless. And then in the OODA kit, we went a step further to 17.4 pH stainless. And so again, it's the best material used here. So that's the material. When taking a look at materials used on the flap side, originally we have this stamped aluminum, which felt like that definitely could handle the job, but with the new mounting mechanism, it wasn't something that Porsche could bring forward. So Porsche here went to nylon, 30% glass filled for both of these assemblies, the 991 and the 718 GT4. For the OODA Motorsports kit, we wanted to go a step even further, and so this is Ultim 1000, which is a high-performance plastic, chemical resistance to things like oil, very high temperature, operating temperature, just a really great material and quite a bit better than nylon. So that's material win here. On the flap side, let's take a look at the designs. So, really the original design is here in the 997. From there, the design has, kind of gone, I would say, like one step evolution. And we're just kind of following that step in what we've done in the OODA design. And it's very closely mirrored to what you see here in the 718. I think the big design wins are, removing the slits, the upgrade of the smaller rod here from 991 to 718 is present, and you can see, in the OODA kit, both of those rods are upgraded. And then with this design change, you need to have an accompanying design change for the flap. So again, these newer flaps kind of fit on this newer rod design. And then the last one is just like how much material there is. And you can see here, there's quite a lot of material. There's quite a lot of material here. Same for this. And you can see here, actually, this small one, the material is a little bit less. Quite a bit of material here. The least amount of material of any of them is right here in the original 997. Again, just in some of these cross sections, it gets quite thin. So yeah, that's kind of the three-prong approach that the OODA kit takes. And you can see here kind of in this example, it just is plug and play in the factory housing, which is great. And you just, buy the kit, take this part out of your car, you install the OODA pieces, and you're ready to run. That's going to conclude the video today. I hope people found it interesting and educational. A lot of learning that I spent over the better part of a year kind of coming up with the OODA solution. And so if people are interested in it, they can go ahead and head to the website. They can purchase this kit for all versions of the GT Medsker engine. So 3.6, 3.8, non-RS, RS, and the 4-liter RS as well. That link will be in the description. And there's actually a blog series that is on the website as well that kind of just details the whole journey from failure to the testing. Thank you so much.